Welcome back. Today is Saturday, February 14th, 2026, and we are witnessing what might be the most significant structural shift in the American government since the late 19th century. For decades, you've heard about the deep state or the unaccountable bureaucracy, but today, it's not just talk. It is a finalized policy. We are looking at three massive stories that define this new era of accountability. First, our anchor story. The Office of Personnel Management has officially finalized the Schedule Policy Career Rule. This reclassifies 50,000 federal positions as at will, effectively ending the era of the bulletproof policymaker. Second, we're diving into the documented evidence of administrative inertia, the actual cases where career staff tried to slow walk presidential orders, from the Department of Labor to Health and Human Services. And finally, we'll look at the rule of many, a new hiring system that finally ditches 19th century exams for 21st century skills. It is about time the government started running like a business that actually answers to its customers, you, the American taxpayer. If you're new here, I'm John Dre, and we're building a community of people who refuse to stand by while the administrative state operates in the shadows. We need voices like yours in this fight for accountability. So hit that subscribe button and let's get into the facts. For over a century, the quiet engine of the American government has been a collection of over 2 million professionals. They manage our national parks, process Social Security checks, and draft the regulations that affect the air you breathe and the safety of the food on your table. But here's the problem. For a long time, the people doing this work have been essentially impossible to fire, even when they disagree with the person you elected to lead the country. This month, February 2026, the Office of Personnel Management finalized a rule that changes everything. It establishes a new category of worker known as Schedule Policy Career. Now the liberal media is going to tell you this is a return to the spoils system of the 1800s. They'll claim it's a purge. But let's look at the actual math. This rule targets approximately 50,000 positions. That is roughly 2% of the federal workforce. We aren't talking about the doctors at the VA hospital or the engineers at NASA. We are talking about the connective tissue of policy, the analysts and managers who have the power to shape regulations and allocate billions of your tax dollars. Under this new rule, these specific employees transition to at-will status. This means they no longer have the right to drag the government through years of appeals at the Merit Systems Protection Board for policy-related disagreements. Think about how the private sector works. If you work at a major corporation and you refuse to implement the CEO's strategy because you personally don't like it, you'd be gone by Monday morning. But in the federal government, removing a low-performing or resistant employee has traditionally taken years and cost taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees. The data is frankly embarrassing. In a workforce of over 2 million people, fewer than half of 1% are fired for poor performance or conduct annually. Does anyone honestly believe that 99.5% of federal workers are performing at a top-tier level? Of course not. Centrist and conservative analysts have long argued that these protections, while they started with good intentions, became a shield for underperformance. Now, the legal foundation for this is what's called the unitary executive theory. It's based on Article 2 of the Constitution, which vests all executive power in the president. The logic is simple. The president is the only person in the executive branch democratically accountable to the entire nation. Therefore, he must have the authority to supervise those who exercise executive power on his behalf. The Supreme Court has already been leaning this way. Back in 2020, in the Seila Law case, the court held that the president must have the authority to remove agency heads who exercise significant discretion. This new rule just extends that logic to the senior career staff who are actually writing the rules that govern your life. Critics will say this will lead to cronyism, but the 2026 reforms explicitly forbid loyalty tests. Employees aren't required to personally support the president's politics. They are simply required to faithfully execute the administration's policies. It's about professionalism over personal ideology. If you can't do the job the elected leader was put there to do, then you shouldn't be in a policy-making role. This is about restoring a balance that the framers of our Constitution intended. It's about a government that is more lean, more effective, and ultimately more accountable to you. But why is this so urgent right now? To understand that, we have to look at how the bureaucracy has actually behaved when it thinks no one is watching. We often hear the term administrative inertia, but what does that actually look like in practice? It sounds like a boring academic phrase, but it is actually a direct challenge to our democracy. It's what happens when career staff use their procedural expertise to delay or subvert the policies of an elected president. Let's look at some documented cases that have come to light recently. At the Department of Labor, staff allegedly claimed that a priority regulation would take a full year to develop. When you do the math on that, it worked out to drafting less than one line of text per day per attorney. One line of text. You could hire a high school student to write more than that before lunch. Then there is the Sharpie incident at the Department of Health and Human Services. Career employees there reportedly bypassed a presidential hiring freeze by manually altering the start dates on paperwork so they would predate the inauguration. Think about the arrogance required to do that. These are people who weren't elected by anyone, yet they decided they knew better than the American voters who chose a new direction for the country. We've also seen reports from the Department of Justice where some career staff in the Civil Rights Division reportedly refused to work on cases involving racial discrimination against Asian Americans because they had ideological disagreements with the administration. In what other job can you just refuse to do your assignments because you don't like the boss's politics and still keep your paycheck? This is exactly why the schedule policy career designation is so necessary. It targets the connective tissue, the analysts, program managers, and specialists who shape policy. If these people can slow walk the goals of an elected leader, it raises a fundamental question. Who is actually in charge of our democracy? The historical context here is important. You might remember learning about the Pendleton Act of 1883. It was passed after President James Garfield was assassinated by a disappointed office seeker who didn't get a government job. That act introduced merit-based selection, which was a good thing. It stopped the spoils system where a president could replace the entire workforce with his buddies. But over time, the pendulum swung too far. By the mid-20th century, the merit system covered 90% of federal employees. And following the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978, the protections became so complex that they created an insulated bureaucracy. The 2026 reforms aren't about going back to the 1800s. They are about making sure that expertise is used in service of the administration's goals, not in service of the bureaucracy's own self-interest. We are already seeing the impact. The civilian workforce actually decreased by about 1% between 2024 and 2025 through hiring freezes and voluntary resignations. The government is becoming leaner, and for a citizenry skeptical of bureaucratic waste, that is a massive win. But it's not just about who we can let go. It's also about how we bring new, talented people into the system. While everyone is focused on the firing part of the reform, there is a critical companion piece that is actually modernizing how we hire. For decades, the federal government was stuck with the rule of three. This meant a hiring manager was forced to choose from only the top 3 candidates on a list. If the 4th or 5th person was actually a better fit, but had a tiny difference in their exam score, the manager couldn't even talk to them. In late 2025, the rule of many officially replaced that legacy system. The rule of many expands the talent pool. It allows managers to see a much broader list of qualified candidates who meet a high scoring threshold, say anyone who scored above a 90. More importantly, it shifts the focus away from those annoying self-reported questionnaires. You know the ones where people just check expert on everything to get past the computer filter. Now, the government is using functional skills assessments. We're talking about job simulations and reviews by actual subject matter experts. This is how the private sector hires, and it's how the government should have been hiring for the last 30 years. And here is the kicker. The new rule explicitly retains essential safeguards. Agencies are still legally forbidden from firing anyone based on race, religion, sex, or age. Protections against nepotism and political retaliation remain in full force. So, when you hear the alarmism on other channels, remember the facts. We are moving toward a workforce that mirrors the private sector. Competitive entry combined with accountability-based exit. It's a restoration of the constitutional balance.